and welcome to the Summer Short Series. My name is Mark Miller, and today I'll be sharing some ideas on what a 21st century classroom could look like. But before all else, I'll share a little bit about why I'm here. I'm currently and choose to remain a classroom instructor at multiple levels in the educational system. I also work with 2 computer companies as their educational advisor as they develop and create educational software. Finally, for the past 2 winters, I've been honored to work with Central and other VET providers working directly with classroom instructors delivering information and developing programming. Today, I will briefly touch on 3 different topics under the umbrella of the 21st century classroom. First, we will look at the idea of a flipped classroom and what components of your lesson can work in this context. Next, we will talk about how effective different types of technology can be in the classroom and look at a model to help you in your decision process. Finally, we will talk about the crucial role you play in your classroom, no matter if your students are sitting directly in front of you or if they are thousands of kilometers away. Although delivery is important, the big questions always revolve around assessment, so we'll take a little time to address that here. So, let's begin our talk today. Today, I'm going to briefly talk about what the 21st century classroom looks like. And really, the ultimate question that a lot of people have is, Mark, am I going to have a job? Is when all these things are put in place with the video like you've just watched and all these great tools that are out there, what's left for me to do? So the things I want you to think about from now until I finish, and please, I have email, Twitter, all those wonderful things I have up at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to follow up with questions. If you would like these presentations, they're all up on YouTube. They're all public. Please help yourself. Same thing with my PowerPoint slides. I do have them saved. I will share that link with you so you can download them and use them yourselves. It's yours. You're free. Please feel free, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions and follow up as we continue. Because in this global community, we're all working together. And that's the main thing I want to talk about. So as you're sitting with a person beside you, or as you're online, I would like you to think about what your fears are around classroom technology. So what I'd like you to do is, if you are face-to-face in the room, turn to an elbow partner or someone sitting close to you and talk about what some of those fears are. And if you're online, if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat box what some of those fears that you have might be around classroom technology. So I'll give you a few minutes to turn to a partner, think about those, and please feel free. There's no judgment, and trust me, I've probably heard these questions before. So please, I'll give you about a minute to think and share with each other, and I will guess at what some of your statements were. Keeping up, big problem. Absolutely, planning a session with technology and then it doesn't work on you, it's a big concern. Keeping up with the students, exactly. The attacks on servers the night before. Engagement, very big one. Very, very big. Resistance, keeping up. Okay, now I have given this presentation before, so here's some of the common questions that I have heard from many others. First one, how do I ensure cohesion between what I do online versus what I do in the classroom? Especially with those wonderful new WA training packages that just came out and the big push for the online component. How do I make sure that the education or the schooling is equivalent? Right beside that, how do I know who's on the other side of the screen? That is an absolutely huge question when it comes to assessment. How do I know who's writing these tests, who are doing these assignments? Won't they just Google the answers? That's a very good question. Google's right there, and even if they're face-to-face with you, most students have that wonderful computer in their pocket. How much more work is this going to be? Very big question I've heard over and over again. How much new technology? Sound familiar? And that last and that wonderful relevant question, will you be relevant? And my hope is the one thing that you leave here with by the time we're done is that yes, you are relevant. You need to be in the classroom. You are not going to be replaced by these wonderful autonomous robots that are going to take your jobs. You need to be there. You understand the curriculum, you understand the students, and you understand the delivery.
Now, all we're going to be talking about in the 21st century is how that delivery piece is going to adjust to the needs of your learners. So, as we continue, as I mentioned, these will be very short. And some things I would like to think about is just to start small. Please don't feel like you have to keep up with the students. That's not what the point is. What we're going to talk about is picking one or two pieces of classroom technology that you've either seen here or you see today or you see other colleagues use. You might stop and say, I kind of like that. I want to use that in mine. And I also realize that everybody is at a different stage. Some people are here. Some people have been using things for years. Some people are just at the brand new understanding stage. And so I'm going to be taking these conversations that we have today more from the survey point of the theory behind some of the technologies and not really getting into the specifics of the technologies. And ultimately, just stay here. You've got friends sitting beside you. You've got friends online. You've got a friend on the other side of the world. That if you hear about something or you like something, and we can work on those connections and try to find someone that is using this technology in their classroom to share their learning with you so that ultimately you can use it within your classroom. So the first thing I want to talk about is the flipped classroom. So I'm going to stop talking for a few minutes, and I'm going to let Chris post the next link for the YouTube. So we're going to do the same thing as we did for the introduction. There will be a short little introduction piece that you'll be able to watch on a video, and then I'll start to break down some of the ideas around the theory behind it. So the link is up, and once again, once you've watched the video, please give me a big old green check mark so I know to continue.
Let's begin our conversation around the flipped classroom. The flipped classroom follows the traditional model, but the components are used differently. For every classroom model, there are two components: when the students are sitting directly in front of you, and what you expect the students to be working on when they're not in class. The three primary topics of focus in the classroom are usually information delivery, approaches to questions, and how students present their learning. The traditional classroom has these activities going on when the students are sitting in front of you. The flipped classroom asks you to consider if these topics can be delivered in an online environment. Let me ask you a question. How would you like to spend those valuable few hours when your students are with you? A flipped classroom provides the opportunity for students to arrive informed about the topic of the day, prepared with meaningful questions based on the homework, and prepared to apply the learning that took place at a time that best suits the student. When the student is on their own, they choose their own learning environment. They can return to the information as often as they need to, and they have the time to mull over the content. So the questions they have when they arrive to class are deeper and more meaningful to their individual learning. Both students and instructors, when applied properly, enjoy this model. The question is, how can I make this model work in my classroom? Please dwell on this question as we continue our conversation.
So the flipped classroom. Really, the theory behind it is to ask yourself the question, are there things that you're doing in your classroom right now that the students could do at home on their own time? And a prime example would be the video that you just watched. That was created by me before, so that way, in theory, you as a student could watch that video at home as many times as you would need to make sure you understand it, and then come to class with questions that are deeper and more thought out versus just trying to sit through the information and staring back at the instructor and just nodding your head that you understand, when on the drive home you're like, oh, that's a great question, I should have asked that. So there's some things that will allow you that opportunity to actually make your classroom time much more rich. So in the traditional classroom, what goes on in the classroom are the lectures, or you have them watch a video while they're sitting in front of you. You have them doing some type of group work or cooperative activity. You have them doing tests and quizzes, doing those individual activities so you can help them as they answer questions, or doing some type of presentation or simulation, or even just answering those questions. And then at home, they do the homework, they review, they practice, they do those readings, and then they do some of those questions that you have them doing. But what about if they're struggling with some of those questions? So what the flipped classroom asks you to think about is there any way to switch those two ideas around? to be able to have all the content delivery, or just the information to be delivered on their own time before they arrive to class. And then when they are in class, all that time that they're sitting in front of you is devoted directly to just disseminating that information, bringing some more depth and process to it, and giving them that time to be able to bounce those ideas off you, because they've had at least an evening to dwell on those ideas and come up with much deeper and richer questions to provide you. So with the flipped classroom before, when they were at home before class, the students would read over the materials that were already covered in class to try and check to make sure they understood what the teacher was talking about. With the flipped classroom, students look at that information before arriving to class. They're digging through it in a way that makes sense to them. If you're primarily a lecturer, you're really only hitting about 12% of your population when you're looking at learning styles. Whereas if you put something online or at home where they can look at it in a way that makes most sense to them and gives them the time to process and understand the information, which is perfect for your English as a second language learners, or those who might have special needs, or what we up here call exceptionalities. It gives them that time to process. I personally am dyslexic, so it takes me a lot longer to read a text than the other average readers. So if you would ask me to read a quick short story and then when you're done we'll answer questions, the class is finished before I finished even a quarter of the reading. So I've missed all that deep, rich conversation because I'm still trying to fight with myself to get through the topic. When the students are in front of you, the current model is they sit there and listen to you lecture, or you give them a few questions to kind of mill about in their heads. Whereas following the flipped classroom, because they've already gone through all that information, they're coming with those deep, meaningful questions. And the practice and the application of that learning can be done in front of you as the classroom instructor. And then ultimately, when class is done, with the current style, students go home and try to attempt the homework without having that support of you walking around with them. Whereas when they go home, they've already had that opportunity to dwell on the information and the learning. And then the products that are created are much deeper and much more rich, show much more learning and understanding. So really the flipped classroom is just asking you to take what you're doing in class, give them an opportunity to do it at home, and then when they're in front of you, all that learning time is spent directly on interacting with the information and chewing through it and really trying to get a deep and better understanding of it. So some of the research that backs up the flipped classroom is, and I'm not going to read, most of you can, that most teachers who use it would recommend it to others. And I'll leave this up for a little bit, but the one stat I would like you to look at is on the last bullet. That only 5% of the students watch a video every day. Half assign a video once a week, and really only a third use videos for less than a week. And ultimately, a flipped classroom doesn't mean go watch a video at home and then come back, and then you as a classroom teacher has to try to take every night you have to create these new videos. All it means is that the information that would normally be given to the students during class time is then given to them ahead of class to allow them to understand it before they get to class. The strengths, more one-on-one time with the students. Instead of disseminating information, you're just checking to make sure they understand it. They learn at their own pace, and it encourages that mastery learning. The rest touched on a little bit, and it involves that support team. How many times have you had to go home and ask a colleague, a spouse, a friend, call somebody to bring that information in? With the flipped classroom, you would now have an opportunity to create the environment of other learners who are also on the same topic and have that opportunity to answer questions. Our students are doing this inherently. How many of your students already right now have created Facebook pages for your course program? It's the same thing. They're doing it inherently because that's just the nature of the student these days. But to be able to have something that's similar, that is a little bit more structured and purposeful, gives them an even better opportunity for learning. There are some drawbacks, as there are to everything. Basically, you're asking your students to spend more time in front of a computer. You're giving them a little bit more homework, but it's a little bit more directed. And ultimately, as someone had brought up with the WA issues around internet, and I know those firsthand, that internet connection can be a serious problem, and also even just the access devices. If the student's not at school and at home, they might not have a laptop or a tablet or even a smartphone that are able to access the information that you have posted online. And then the final thing with the flipped classroom is that it is still a lecture. Right now, I am at the exact opposite end of the earth, but it is still a one-way conversation pretty much. You can interact, you can ask questions, but ultimately I'm still that vessel of knowledge dictating what I know to you to give you some time to dwell on it. So there are some strengths and some drawbacks, but ultimately it's a model I enjoy, and it gives me that time to work with my students. So one thing I would like to leave you with, just based on the time we have and looking at my schedule, I'm a little off my schedule, so we won't do this activity, but I would like you to think about these things, is as you're looking at the idea of the flipped classroom, the technology piece itself, which is always the big question, and a few of you have brought it up in the chat window, you don't need to keep up with the technology that the kids have or that your students have. You need to keep up with the technology that you feel comfortable with. Most colleges, down from what I remember, are using the Blackboard and the Moodle platforms. There are others like the D2L, which is the digital classroom. All these things are up there, and it's just getting yourself comfortable with the tools that are embedded within them. You don't have to create the videos. If there are videos out there that are made that share that topic exactly, then please feel free to share those. Whatever topic is out there, there are opportunities for you to use what is your strength. The one example I like to use is the idea of the collaborative document. So if you have Microsoft Office 365 or Google Documents or something along those lines, they have what's called a collaborative document, where multiple people can be working on the same document at the same time. It's a fantastic tool, but ultimately, if you understand what tool that you have, the students are really great at adapting when it comes to technology. So as long as you're able to explain to them what you would like them to do, there's a good chance they have done the same thing on a different platform. They just need to apply those skills in a different context, which ultimately is our role as instructors, is to just give them tools that they could then apply and use in other contexts. So that's what the flipped classroom is, and once again, I apologize, that's an extremely brief and quick fly-through, and I do mean fly, of the flipped classrooms. There's a lot of information out there. I am more than willing to answer any questions as they come up through emails, or how it might look, or even what a classroom looks like with a flipped classroom. So please feel free to shoot me an email at any time. Now I'll do the quick little segue, riding on my segue, and we'll switch to part 2, which is the idea of, Mark, what technology should I use, and how do I know what technology would work best with my style? So this is where the idea of the SAMR model comes into play. So once again, take a look, watch the video, and then we'll talk a little bit about the SAMR model and technology.
Let's take a look at your role as facilitator and how technology can support your classroom approach. The best way to approach this topic is by asking yourself what technology you feel comfortable with, then deciding how it can augment your lesson design. Once you have chosen your piece of technology to use, I would suggest following the SAMR model of implementation. There are 4 different levels of support that technology can offer you when you are looking at lesson design and delivery. Ultimately, it comes down to your level of comfort when looking at technology. You need to have a good understanding of its use before implementation. The integration of technology into your lesson development and delivery is not to burden you with more work, but to provide you with tools to streamline your delivery and your assessment models of the students and their learning. The question I would like you to think about for this section is, how can instructional technology make your life and your classroom approach easier?
So, the idea of the SAMR model. So, I actually want to take a step back a little bit and talk about an idea that those who have seen me speak in 2014 might have had the opportunity to learn about, the TPAC model. So TPAC stands for Technological, Pedagogical, and Content Knowledge. which basically means that there are three different components when you're looking at your classroom. The first piece is the technological knowledge, which is how well do you know your technology. Next is the pedagogical knowledge, which is how well do you know how to teach. Those skills and tactics and strategies from beyond Monet and the Barry Bennett work that has gone on down there, things like that. And finally, the idea of the content knowledge, which is how well you know your topic. And as you work through that wonderful little middle piece of the tri-Venn diagram is that area where you're trying to identify where your strengths are in technology. I am a classroom teacher. I choose to stay as a classroom teacher, and my primary area of teaching is in English. So the idea of teaching novels and studies and all those type of things. When I look at these three areas, I would consider myself honest. If I were to give myself a rating out of 100, I would say my technological knowledge would be about 40%, my content knowledge about 10%, and my pedagogical knowledge about 50%. Being the dyslexic, I don't read as much as I should, especially teaching English. So I try to augment that by having a bunch of different strategies and tactics I use in the classroom to have the kids or students more engaged with the topic and then blind them with technology, as I like to call it. For example, the videos you just watched, that is not my hand, that is not my drawing, that is a computer program that has preset animations that all I do is click and drag them onto a page. And then I just add the timings, and when it's all said and done, I click a button, it allows me to do a voiceover, and then clickety-click, it's now up online. So it's fantastic, I enjoy it. My hope is next week I want to put up a little instructional video on how to use that program. That's kind of my goal. Is my role as I'll call myself an instructional coach, is to provide different examples of different classroom technologies that you could use tomorrow. The theory's great, but as a classroom teacher and as all of you are, we want to be able to sit down and say, that's great, but how can I use that in my class tomorrow? And that's what I hope to do with these wonderful little videos. So, the idea, I'll get my mouse back, looking at SAMR. So SAMR is an initialism. Thank you, Ferg, for that one, if you're listening. It's not an acronym. An acronym spells the words. An initialism is just a bunch of letters put together that people try to turn into an acronym. So SAMR, I'm turning it into the acronym, stands for the Substitution, Augmentation, Modification, and redefinition of lesson plan design through the use of technology. So a substitution is the lower level or the simplest use of technology in your classroom, which is you're just substituting something you would do by using technology. So students sit on the computer, fill out the worksheet, prints off and hand it in, versus you standing in front of the photocopier, printing it off, getting the photocopies and handing it to them. Another use of substitution is an instructor who replaces the overhead projector with PowerPoints. There has been absolutely no change in the way they present the information. They just have to replace the technology that's being used, because as I'm finding out in my classrooms, no one wants to replace those overhead bulbs anymore, because I don't even think they make them anymore. So what has happened is some people have taken their overheads and just turned them into PowerPoint slides, but there's been absolutely no change in the way they style or approach their classroom. Augmentation is the next step up, where there's been a little bit of improvement within your approach to your classroom because of technology. So something as simple as using a SurveyMonkey or a Google form if you're a Google school, instead of printing off a bunch of multiple choice questions, giving them to the students, having them fill them out, and then hand them back in. At least with SurveyMonkey or Google Docs, the program tabulates the scores for you. So it eases your burden a little bit, but there really isn't a lot of change in the way you approach your classroom. A modification is where you now start to see some of those great changes and growths and shifts in how you approach the classroom and learning that's going on. So as I mentioned before, the collaborative document piece, either with Google Documents or Office 365 or D2L or Moodle, where students can go on and work on the same document at the same time. I found in my teaching practice, sometimes I've had students say, "Sir, we have to work on a group project, but your class is the only time we can all get together at the same time, so I now have to stop my lesson to allow my students time to work in class because this is the only time they can sit together." Whereas with something like a Google Docs or an Office 365, these collaborative documents, I could say, you know what, you guys just figure out a time to go home, sit in your pajamas when everybody else is in bed, get online, work on the document at the same time. Or don't even worry about going on at the same time. Get on when you can, work on the document, add your piece in, and then when we get to class the next time, it's all said and done. This is a great comparison of I like to use when I've done PowerPoint presentations, but I've team presented. And what has happened to us, which I'm sure has happened to many of you, when you have to work with somebody else and send documents back and forth through email, you forget what draft you're on. I work on it, I send it back, they work on it, they send it back, I work on it some more, they send it back, but while I send it back, they work on something else. And so we actually lose revisions because these documents are floating back and forth through cyberspace. With the collaborative piece, we can either go on at the same time or work on something, share it with our partner back and forth, and that document is stored in the cloud. I'll say cloud. So that document is stored somewhere that we all have access to, but it's a single document all worked on together that everyone can download at their own time and bring in at the same time. And ultimately, the idea of the redefinition and the idea of SAMR is, how can I redefine or change the way I approach my classroom because of technology? And the one that I like to do here is I will talk about presentations. As someone who teaches English, part of my classes I have to assess a presentation. And as you know, sometimes presentations can be a little dry. So, of course, we have to book them all together because it's unfair to give some students more time to work on them than others. But we lose a week or maybe even 2 weeks of classroom time where we all have to sit down and watch group after group or even individual after individual present. It's daunting, it's a lot of time, and they only present once. And if I miss something, I've missed it. What I like to do now is what I would call my redefinition is I have them create a YouTube video. Something as simple as just turning on their webcam and having the camera on them, doing voiceovers for a PowerPoint, create a Prezi, do the video scribe like the videos I've shown you, where it's still a presentation, they still have to write a script. The only difference is they're not presenting in front of you, they're presenting to a camera. So this is our little 21st century video right here. Students are able to present in a way that makes a little bit more sense to them. They don't have the stress of presenting in front of people. And why I like it is because when I'm assessing them, I can sit in my pajamas at home and watch the video 2 or 3 or 4 times and take notes. I can press pause, go to the restroom, come back, and keep going. And how I find it helps me in the classroom is it redefines my role when students are presenting. Before, when they're presenting in front of me, I am feverishly trying to keep up with my writing of my notes to make sure I can give them that formative feedback. If in class they just bring the video, put it on the screen, and press play, I am now fully engaged as an audience member watching the video, and they can see my face as I'm watching because I'm looking at the screen, not at a piece of paper in front of me as I'm giving notes. So they get that great positive reinforcement, and then I can just take some time to assess it at home on my own time. So the idea of the SAMR piece really offers that opportunity to change the way you approach a class, but ultimately looking through the lens of the child or the student, how they can benefit from the integration of that technology piece. Now, a lot of technology companies are jumping on the SAMR bandwagon. So, for example, this is a very simple screenshot of some of the iPad apps that can be used in the SAMR pieces. It's a little hard to see. Once again, if you want my slides, please feel free. Another one is this great, wonderful piece that's called the pedagogy wheel. And the reason they call it the pedagogy wheel is because these are all different iPad apps that have been broken down into the different categories of SAMR, as well as the different categories of Bloom's taxonomy. Now, I'm sharing this document with everybody, and I will make sure you guys have an opportunity to get this as well. And the great thing about this document is it's an interactive PDF. So anything that's on here, like any of these little slides, so right over here, there's a little Google icon. I can, because it's a PDF, an interactive PDF, I can click on this little icon right here, and it'll actually take me to the website for this program. So this is fantastic. Even if you just Google the pedagogy wheel, this should be the first image that comes up. And the great thing, this gentleman right here, of course, is a little too small for me to read it, but he's out of Australia. And it's his work, it's his piece. I cannot claim any of this, but it is fantastic. If you are an iPad school or you have your own iPads, this is an incredible place to start. But as I said before, pick one. Don't feel overwhelmed that you have to know everything. Pick one that you've heard of or you like even like start with Facebook. Pick one that you like, one that's relatively popular with both you and your students, and start from there. Once you feel comfortable, then you can start looking at expansion. So that is my little piece on SAMR. The one thing I would like to give you a little time to do, both online and face-to-face, is give you about 2 minutes just to share with your elbow partner or online a piece of technology that you use in your classroom. So for example, my videos I make off something called VideoScribe. It's a program you can download to your computer. It saves everything to a cloud, and all these animations are done, and it looks nice and pretty, and I don't have to worry about a thing because I cannot draw. I try my best, but I can't. So with an elbow partner, face-to-face, or with the chat window, please feel free to share any piece of technology you use in your classroom and how you might use it. And I'll give you about 2 minutes to do that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as you're finishing off your conversations, I will ask Chris to post the last video that we'll end off on, and that is your role of the instructor as we look at technology. So this video is a little bit longer. It's about 2.5 minutes, and then I'll do a brief little explanation, and then I will pass you off to those who are next on the agenda, and I will say my thanks.
Let's take a look at the role of the instructor in the 21st century classroom. I would like to ask you to start by looking at your students. They're coming to your program, juggling many activities, and ultimately hoping to improve themselves to meet the challenges that face them in the job market of today and tomorrow. Your role as a classroom instructor is to keep your students' outcomes in the forefront of your program while making sure your lessons are content-rich. Also, you want your students engaged and interested in the topic being presented, all while choosing a delivery model that meets your strengths. My hope is that the 2 previous topics discussed provided you with a starting point to consider an increased use of technology in your delivery. As we shift our focus onto what assessment could look like in the digital classroom, I would like to once again return to your students and ask you how you are currently testing your students on the material covered in class. We all have some incredible ways to check for understanding in our students, but when we refine or boil down the activity into a single term, usually our assessments fall into one of 3 categories. It is either a test, an assignment, or a presentation. Paper-based assessment approaches create a literal mound of work that needs to be sifted through, graded, and recorded. So, how can technology ease the amount of busy work I must complete for my course? In my experience, I have found that returning to Bloom's taxonomy of thinking is a good starting point. I divide the 6 levels of thinking into 2 smaller groups. The first group are the lower 3 levels of thinking: remembering, understanding, and applying. The second group are the top 3 levels of thinking: analyzing, creating, and evaluating. I like these groupings because it allows me to easily define the type of assessment I'm asking my students to complete. In the first grouping, I'm asking my students to prove what they know. With the second grouping, I'm asking my students to prove to me that you get it, which that higher level of blooms naturally leads towards. Keeping these 2 things in mind, we will look at how technology can support your assessment approach and ensure continuity across all the delivery models you choose to use in your classroom.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking at the clock and realizing that my time is really close to being done, so I will try to be as quick as possible with this, and I apologize for that. The big piece around that always comes up with technology is the assessment piece, and how do I make sure my assessments are true and authentic in a portal like this. So the question I always pose to people is, are you using task-based assessments where it's a single approach in your classroom where everybody is doing the exact same thing? Or are you looking at the skills-based approach, which is you're allowing your students that opportunity to differentiate the way they present their learning in a way that makes sense to them, but still presenting those skills that have been developed within your course. And it's a wonderful bag of worms that we can open at any point, except right now. So I will leave this idea with you, that if you have some questions or you'd like some further discussion, I have no problem even making a video and posting this online and sharing this with people as we continue. I could probably even do that by tomorrow, so your tonight, and see if I can have that ready for you guys over the weekend, so you have this little piece to follow up on, which will give me a little bit more time to provide some more explanation and a little bit more detail. But the one thing I did want to leave with you all as we move on and you move on to your next courses is that myself and the training facility for Western Australia have talked about possibly doing some more of these individual topics, the flipped classroom, the SAMR, and the role of assessment in some little bit deeper conversations in a similar format. If that's something you would like to have happen through this format, please feel free to share your ideas with those around you. Include that in your review of the program and the learning that you go through today. And ultimately, I will leave you with these things, which are all my contact information. So please feel free to contact me, add me on Twitter, check out the website, and I have no problem going into more depth on an individual basis, program basis, and just help you through the journey. Because that's all this is. I'm still learning, we're still learning. I learn so much from my students and my interactions with others that I am just honestly blessed to be able to have this opportunity to share some of these ideas with you in this format, and I have no problem continuing these conversations when I wake up in the morning. I am going to go to bed in a bit. So you guys enjoy your day. Thank you so much for listening, and please feel free to keep these conversations going. Thank you.
Authorised by the Government of Western Australia, Perth.